Well, hello class, here we are with week one of the course, and we're going to very quickly go over the chapters that you're going to be looking at in week one in our textbook, which is entitled Transforming Healthcare Leadership. And the first two chapters, the first chapter is referred to from management myths to strategic intelligence. And one of the things that you want to make sure that you pay attention to in this textbook is that they talk about defining myths, and they start out by giving you the definition of what a myth is. And then more appropriately, they talk about management myths. And the reason that this is important for you to understand is because as a leader, someone who is studying leadership in the healthcare industry, there are management myths that you need to be aware of that are things that you're going to be exposed to as a manager that may not necessarily be true. The author of our textbook talks about 12 of those things to give you some examples of what he considers to be management myths. Are things like one of them that he's got listed is the best results are gained by managing by the numbers. The author's concept, of which we have 4 for this textbook, agree that sometimes managing an organization as a leader doesn't necessarily equate to just looking at the bottom line and looking at spreadsheets all the time and being a leader that relies strictly on that type of information. One of the other management myths that they list in their 12 are people need to be held more accountable. Now, I got to tell you, I don't agree with that one because I think that people do need to be held more accountable, and I don't consider that to be a myth whatsoever because in my experience as a leader and healthcare manager, if you don't hold people accountable, they won't do anything. So again, this is the author's take on that particular topic. Another myth that they list is more data is needed to improve management. Well, again, that may necessarily be true in the broadest sense, and just looking at it from a global perspective. But I've got to tell you that the more information that you do have as a leader and manager in healthcare, the better off you're going to be because you'll be able to make more informed decisions. So I'm not sure that I agree with that myth either. So you can go through the 12 myths here and decide for yourself in your experience whether or not you agree with what the author talks about there. But just be aware that that's what is covered in Chapter 1, and you should become familiar with it, if for nothing else but testable information. The authors also talk about types of leaders and the 4 Ps. They bring to your attention that there are strategic leaders, operational leaders, and network leaders, and then they go into detail about who those individuals are and how they lead their organizations. And they talk about the 4 Ps and tell you what that's all about. The first one being the organization's purpose. The second one, the practical values that are essential for achieving that purpose. The third is the basis for ethical and moral reasoning used to make decisions. And the fourth, how results will be defined and measured. Again, I'm not sure why those are called the 4 Ps because the first 2 have Ps in them, but the third and fourth ones don't. So I'm not sure who is authoring and auditing this textbook for correctness, but if you're going to talk about something like the 4 Ps, you'd think that everything would be listed as Ps and not just going to kind of go off the rails there. They do talk about strategic intelligence. Strategic intelligence being something that prepares leaders for these interrelated skills that include having foresight, having vision, being able to partner, and be a motivating individual. So become familiar with that terminology. One of the things that they do bring to your attention in this chapter that I do like and am a fan of, and that's Dr. W. Edward Deming. Dr. Deming was considered to be the father of quality assurance in our country and some places around the world. And if you are not familiar with W. Edward Deming, he had a lot to say and a lot to do and a lot written by him that has to do with leadership. It all boils down to Deming's system of profound knowledge for leaders. So he'll give you some exposure to that, where he'll talk about strategic intelligence being buttressed by knowledge, not only knowledge of the healthcare business, but also knowledge about things like systems, how to deal with variation, the decision-making process, and the careful testing of theories. And that's one of the things that if you study Deming, you'll learn about. He has very good insights into things relative to systems and how leaders can make systems work by having that kind of knowledge. Then in chapter 2, the authors jump into why and how healthcare organizations need change. Now you'll say, well, what does change have to do with leadership in healthcare? Well, it has everything to do with that. Because as a leader in healthcare, you need to be aware of the fact that if there is one constant that you're going to have happening in front of you all the time as a healthcare leader, and that is change. So you've got to be familiar with change management. And they want you to be familiar with a publication that was published, written by the Institute of Medicine in a 2001 report that they wrote called Crossing the Quality Chasm, where they describe the kinds of problems that leaders run into and healthcare organizations need to be aware of when they run into problems that require change. They need to know how to avoid mistakes that lead them to that point in the first place. These are going to be things that have the potential to harm patients, and they result in variability of diagnosis and treatment measures, uncontrolled costs, stuff like that. So become familiar with this report of Crossing the Quality Chasm, and they just bring you excerpts of it in chapter 2 of the textbook, but you can actually go online and download, do a search, an internet search for Institute of Medicine publications, and you'll find that there. And you can download it for free, the entire report, and read it for yourself. A lot of good information. They also will introduce you to modes of production in our country, where they say that historically there have been 3 dominant modes of production in Western societies, and it pertains to the United States, that are characterized by different tools, work roles, relationships, and organizations. And these modes of production are referred to craft-independent roles, independent roles, industrial bureaucratic roles, and knowledge interactive roles. So study a little bit about that and get into the details. And also you'll see a chart in the book that kind of breaks these down for you to give you a better explanation of how they apply. And they'll show you that there's a column for craft-independent roles, industrial bureaucratic roles, and one for knowledge interactive roles. And they'll use an example there of, for example, a medical diagnostic tool. And they give you, under the column of craft-independent, why a medical diagnostic tool fits under that category. They tell you that it is a craft-independent role or tool that's important because it contributes to doing physical examinations, taking care of patient histories, and in the modern age, they talk about how this has contributed to the industrial processes that we have within the United States. And then you go to the industrial bureaucratic column, they talk about things that have been developed relative to medical diagnostic tools and give examples of those. And then knowledge interactive and why that pertains to that particular mode of production that they're trying to get you familiar with. So study that chart and try to get a handle on what it is that they're referring to there relative to mode of production. Now again, why is it important for a leadership, someone who's studying leadership, a healthcare professional, a manager of the future? Why is this type of information important to you? Well, again, just like most textbooks do, this textbook is trying to give you a historical perspective of where we are in the United States as it pertains to leadership. And these are kind of the background things that you need to become familiar with that have led us from the beginning of time where we started developing leadership potential and roles and right up to present day. They also will talk about emerging principles in chapter 2. I think that these emerging principles that they talk about here are kind of dated, and that's because our textbook is a little dated. It's dated a 2013 textbook. But they talk about 3 principles that have emerged from research and consulting that this group of folks did that wrote this book. And so they're going to talk about learning organizations and how healthcare organizations should be patient-focused. They're going to talk about patient knowledge, advocacy, and shared decision-making, and why those are important and can be enhanced by embracing information technology. In other words, becoming more IT savvy. and they'll discuss a little bit about social media and how that's contributing to us becoming more effective leaders as well. They'll talk about healthcare organizations contributing to social systems because they're made up of lots of different people that have the ability to communicate with each other via social networks now. And as a leader, that's something that you need to be aware of, because leadership is needed to create common values and purpose if you're to have any understanding of how healthcare organizations participate using social media these days. So if you're not real savvy about social media these days, which a lot of people are not and just starting to become, definitely as a leadership person of the future and studying leadership, you need to be a little bit savvy there and understand what they're talking about. Now, I said that the authors also talked about the learning organization. As a learning organization, a healthcare organization has several defining attributes, and they talk about what all those are, and they'll go into those in greater detail in chapters 5 and 6 of the textbook. They'll talk about learning from practice being widely shared and used for innovation and improvement, and they'll talk about how learning is used to inform a community and aid in the prevention of illness and improve population health. So that's the importance of a learning organization. And again, if you have been studying leadership and healthcare management in general, the words or definition of a learning organization should not be foreign to you, and you should have a feeling for what that is referring to, because that is becoming more popular terminology as well within the healthcare industry. Our authors also talk about methods to build the foundation of a learning organization, and they suggest to you that you want to put down on paper what the purpose of your organization is. Make sure that you have a point of view and in writing, view what the organization is as a system. In other words, develop a model of the organization that describes how work is actually accomplished and how the processes of work are linked together within the organization. They talk about how work is measured, sources of information for learning, and again, getting back to the information technology bit, where you have to become more information technology savvy these days, more so than ever in the past. And they couple that with learning a lot about strategic planning and dealing with people from a team effort standpoint of view. That's all going to contribute to a learning organization, and they're going to introduce you to that just on the periphery and how that pertains to leadership in Chapter 2. They're also going to talk about how gaps in information is important to be identified as a leader. You need to be able to identify gaps that are going to help you communicate a vision that you have as a leader. It's going to help you to be able to develop relationships of trust with the people that work for you. They're going to talk about why identifying gaps in information as they pertain to a learning organization, why those are important, and why you as someone who's studying leadership should be familiar with that. They talk about leadership responsibilities. They tell you that leaders must develop relationships of trust, and leaders need to communicate a vision. Again, getting into more detail what I was just talking about on the previous slide that pertains to a learning organization and why that's important. And then last, they're going to talk about the human side of change and introduce to you the role of physicians and the expert personality. They're going to talk about the culture of healthcare organizations and social character, the social character of physicians, and how their role plays a key role in facilitating and impeding change. We're talking about, again, change management in an organization, and you need to be aware of it. You studying leadership need to be aware that sometimes physicians can throw a monkey wrench into your best efforts to lead change. So they're going to talk about that human side of change, and you need to be aware that there are a lot of things there that can impact your organization positively and negatively. And they're going to talk about the approach to service and how you can try to delay conflicts between professionals who have different views of service to patients. They're going to talk to you and introduce you to the role of the culture within a learning organization. Make sure that you're aware as a leader what the culture of that organization is and how sometimes the patient can get lost in the shuffle. And they'll give you a lot of different examples there about the human side of change and why that's important from a leadership standpoint of view. So in summary, Chapter 2 is going to talk and bring to your attention things like patients are changing, they're no longer passive, they're going to be more actively engaged in their health care. So you in a leadership role need to be aware of that and make sure that you're ready to take action that responds to that type of attitude. Be aware that information technology is playing more of an influential role now than it ever has been, not only from a management standpoint of view, but with the patients being more involved as well. Don't forget the role of the physician and how in a changing organization, a learning organization, you need to be familiar with the pluses and minuses of how to deal with physicians. You're going to be introduced to the resistance of change in this chapter, how to work with nurses and other people within the healthcare organization, and social systems, and how social media can help you to drive you to be a better leader in that respect. So there's going to be a lot of information relative to healthcare transformation, change management of the organization, and how leadership is an important thing for you to grasp and understand and take it to heart. And as a future potential healthcare administrator, understand that your leadership capability is going to be extremely important to the organization. So essentially, again, chapters 1 and 2 are going to be introductory chapters that are going to kind of talk about where the healthcare industry has been, where it is today, why leadership is important to it, and they're going to introduce you to some concepts that have kind of evolved and bringing us into the 21st century. So again, this information is important for your basic knowledge before we move into the other chapters of the book. But again, as a potential healthcare administrator or manager or leader of the future, this is where you need to start, is with your baseline level to give you an understanding of that regard. So have a good week. Again, you know how to contact me relative to my office hours being held Monday through Friday from 9 in the morning to 3 in the afternoon. You can send me an email, and if you need to talk to me even quicker than that, send me a text via telephone. And if you're unable to talk to me during those normal working hours, we can always schedule an appointment for after normal working hours or even on the weekend. So good luck with week 1 information, and again, reach out to me if you have any difficulties or want further explanation. I'll be glad to reach back and discuss it with you in detail one-on-one. So have a good week, and I will see you again soon. Bye.